"Get that civilian out of my engine room," Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole said, and 3 seconds later, every emergency light aboard the USS Resolute went black. The darkness swallowed the lower deck so completely that even the hum of ventilation seemed to vanish with it. For one breathless moment, the destroyer felt less like a warship and more like a steel tomb tied to the pier at Naval Station Norfolk. Then the backup circuit caught. Red lamps blinked awake along the passageway, painting the bulkheads in narrow strips of crimson. Somewhere below, a relay clicked twice and fell silent. Sailors stopped moving. Tools hung motionless in gloved hands. Above them, wind pushed hard across the harbor, snapping the ship's flag against its line. Rear Admiral Thomas Whitaker had been aboard for less than 10 minutes. This was supposed to be the Resolute's most important inspection of the year, a controlled demonstration of readiness before senior command. Instead, the ship had lost main power with the Admiral standing on her deck. Cole raised his flashlight and forced his voice to remain steady. "Engineering control, report." Static answered first. Then a strained voice came through the handheld radio. "Main generators show available, sir. Distribution panels show closed, but the load will not hold." Cole looked toward his technicians. They were young, highly trained, and surrounded by diagnostic equipment that cost more than most houses. Laptops glowed on battery power. Digital meters flashed green. Every screen insisted the system was ready. The ship remained dark. Near the aft bulkhead stood Walter Mercer, 82 years old, thin beneath a faded navy blue jacket, one hand resting on a black notebook worn soft at the corners. He had boarded with the Historical Affairs Group, an invited guest from another era. Cole had barely noticed him until the power failed. Now the old man was not looking at the screens. He was listening, his head tilted slightly, as if the silent machinery were speaking in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. "Sir," an engineer called. "We can attempt a full restart." Cole checked his watch. The inspection clock was still running. If they could not restore stable power within 40 minutes, the failure would be entered into the readiness report. Several compartments would have to be cleared, and the Resolute's deployment schedule could be questioned. "Do it," he ordered. Switches moved. A deep vibration traveled through the deck plates beneath their boots. For half a second, the overhead lights brightened. Then a dull shudder passed through the ship, and everything dropped back to red. Walter's fingers tightened around the notebook. Cole saw the movement and turned on him. "This is a restricted engineering space. You need to return topside." Walter did not move. His pale eyes remained fixed on the deck. "That restart sounded wrong," he said quietly. Cole's jaw hardened. "The computer will tell us what sounded wrong." Walter finally looked at him. There was no challenge in his face, only the calm of someone who had heard this silence before. "No, Commander," he said. "The computer is telling you the ship has power. The ship is telling you she does not want it." Then the red lights flickered again. The red lights steadied, but the air inside the engineering space had already begun to change. Without full ventilation, heat gathered beneath the steel overhead and settled around the sailors like a damp blanket. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole moved quickly between the control stations, reading numbers aloud while his technicians compared digital logs, breaker positions, and generator output. Every reading offered a different version of the truth. The first generator reported ready. The second showed no fault. The main distribution panel confirmed that power had been accepted, yet the current vanished the instant the load began to climb. Cole ordered another diagnostic cycle. Portable fans slowed on their batteries. The low electronic beeping from the laptops seemed unnaturally loud against the quiet ship. Walter Mercer remained near the aft bulkhead, his black notebook tucked beneath one arm. He closed his eyes for a moment. The deck gave a faint tremor beneath his shoes, followed by a soft metallic tick from somewhere beyond the wall. He waited for a second sound. It never came. Ensign Noah Bennett noticed him. Noah was 25, newly assigned to the Resolute, and careful enough to observe before speaking. He stepped closer. "What are you listening for, sir?" Walter opened his eyes. "A transfer relay should answer after the generator takes the load." Noah glanced toward the panel. "The display says it transferred. The display says it received the command." Walter looked down at the steel beneath them. "That is not the same thing." Cole heard the exchange and turned sharply. "Ensign Bennett, return to your station." "Mr. Mercer, I already asked you to leave." Noah obeyed, though his attention remained on the old man. Walter did not argue. He simply placed 2 fingers against the bulkhead. The metal carried a weak vibration, uneven and interrupted. "Your forward bus is awake," he said. "Your aft bus is waiting for something that never arrives." One of the technicians gave a restrained smile. Cole did not. "We have sensors on every major circuit aboard this ship. We do not diagnose electrical failures by touching walls." Walter withdrew his hand. "Then ask your sensors why the deck is quiet." Cole turned back to the main console. "Prepare a manual transfer. Isolate non-essential loads and bring the system up in stages." Switches moved in sequence. The generator note deepened. White lights flashed to life along the overhead, sharp enough to make several sailors blink. A ventilation fan began to turn. Relief passed through the room, small but immediate. Cole watched the load indicator rise. Walter watched the second hand on an old silver wristwatch. 10%, a technician called. 20, 30. Walter spoke under his breath. "Not yet." The current climbed past 40%. Then a hollow knock traveled through the deck, followed by silence. The lights vanished. The fan slowed to a stop. On the radio, a voice reported that an auxiliary compartment had lost cooling and a service elevator had stalled between decks. Cole stared at the dead panel as the inspection clock continued to run. Walter slowly opened his notebook. The pages were yellowed, their edges darkened by oil and years of salt air. He turned past hand-drawn circuits and faded pencil. Notes until he found a page marked by a white stain running diagonally across the paper. His finger stopped beside 2 words written 40 years earlier. "Sleeping Breaker." The words on the page meant nothing to Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole. He stepped closer, the red emergency light cutting hard shadows across his face, and looked down at the faded drawing beneath Walter Mercer's hand. It was not a formal schematic. The lines had been made in pencil, corrected in ink, and crowded with small notes written along the margins. Some were technical, others were not. "Widow line. Cold start. Sleeping breaker." Cole stared at the page, then at Walter. "This is what you are using to diagnose a modern destroyer." Walter kept his finger beside the old notation. "This ship is modern where people can see her." Cole took the notebook before Noah Bennett could object. He turned several pages with the impatient care of a man inspecting something he had already decided was useless. There were hand-drawn circuits, load tables, dates from another century, and names of ships that had long since left the fleet. Dark oil marked the corners. A circular stain covered part of one diagram. One page had been scorched along the edge until the paper curled inward like a dry leaf. A technician named Petty Officer Mason leaned over Cole's shoulder. "It looks like something from a museum archive." A few restrained laughs passed through the compartment. Walter did not reach for the notebook. He watched Cole hold it beneath the red light. "This vessel runs on integrated digital controls," Cole said. "We have automated fault isolation, real-time load monitoring, and redundant power management. Whatever worked 40 years ago does not apply here." Walter looked toward the silent ventilation fan. "Then why is a 40-year-old problem standing in your engine room?" The laughter stopped. Cole's expression tightened. He pointed to the strange handwritten labels. "Widow line. Sleeping breaker." These are not recognized system terms. They were not written for inspectors. Then who were they written for? Walter's eyes settled on the burned page. The men who had to remember after the manuals failed. Them. The words landed softly, but the compartment seemed to grow quieter around them. Noah moved nearer and studied the open notebook without touching it. Beneath the scorched edge, 6 surnames had been written in a narrow column. Each had a date beside it. Cole noticed them too. "What is this list?" Walter's face did not change. A reason not to laugh at names you do not understand. For the first time, Petty Officer Mason looked away. Cole closed the notebook and held it out. "History has value, Mr. Mercer, but it does not give you authority aboard my ship." Walter accepted it with both hands. "I did not ask for authority." "Then what are you asking for?" Walter reopened the notebook and turned back to the page marked Sleeping Breaker. He tapped a small symbol drawn beneath the stain. "Access to the original aft transfer cabinet." Cole shook his head. That cabinet was replaced during modernization. The panel was replaced. Walter raised his gaze. The interlock behind it was not. Cole opened his mouth to answer, but the radio on his belt came alive. The cooling temperature in the auxiliary compartment had climbed another 12 degrees. Backup power was falling faster than expected. Walter closed the notebook. You have 28 minutes, he said. After that, this stops being an inspection problem. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole looked at the inspection clock, then at the dead control panel. 28 minutes was not enough time to dismantle an obsolete cabinet based on a handwritten note, and he refused to let an old memory overrule every diagnostic system aboard the Resolute. We are not opening sealed equipment without confirmation, he said. Run the revised software sequence and restore the load from the forward bus. Ensign Noah Bennett glanced at Walter Mercer, but Walter offered no argument. He stepped back against the bulkhead and held the notebook close to his chest. The technicians moved quickly. Commands passed from station to station. Non-essential circuits were isolated. Cooling pumps, navigation equipment, and internal communications were arranged in a controlled restart order. Cole stood at the center of the compartment, his face composed again, his confidence rebuilt by familiar procedures. Begin transfer. A low mechanical hum rose beneath the deck. This time the vibration was clean and steady. One row of white lights came alive, followed by another. The ventilation system coughed once, then began pushing cool air through the compartment. Computer screens brightened across the consoles, filling the red shadows with pale blue light. A voice over the radio confirmed that the stalled service elevator had resumed moving. Another reported that cooling had returned to the auxiliary compartment. Relief moved through the sailors. Petty Officer Mason smiled openly. Load holding at 30%. Cole watched the numbers climb. 40%. The lights remained steady. 50%. Cole turned toward Walter. Modern systems can be stubborn, Mr. Mercer. That does not make them mysterious. Walter was not looking at him. He was watching the old silver wristwatch on his left arm. The second hand crossed the 12. 1, he said quietly. Noah heard him. 2. The ventilation fan changed pitch. It was almost too subtle to notice, a faint strain hidden beneath the stronger sound of restored machinery. Walter lifted his eyes toward the overhead lights. 3. A deep hollow knock traveled through the ship. Every screen flashed white. The main lights died at once, and the emergency lamps returned weaker than before. A warning tone sounded from the backup panel. Cole spun toward the display. Report. The answer came through heavy static. The forward bus rejected the load, sir. Battery reserve has dropped below 60%. Auxiliary cooling did not restart. The service elevator stopped again, but the sailors inside are communicating and stable. The compartment fell silent except for the warning tone. Cole stared at the readings, searching for a pattern that was no longer there. The software had not merely failed. It had consumed precious reserve power and returned them to a worse position. Walter opened the notebook to the scorched page. The first restart wakes it, he said. The second convinces it that the ship is in danger. Cole looked at the handwritten symbol beneath. Walter's finger. What is it protecting? Walter turned his gaze toward the aft bulkhead. A circuit that the modernization records say no longer exists. Noah stepped forward. Commander, permission to inspect the original transfer cabinet. Cole did not answer immediately. Pride held him still for one final second. Then another alarm joined the first, and the red lights dimmed across the compartment. He looked at Walter, no longer seeing a historical guest with an old notebook. He saw the only man aboard who had predicted the failure before it happened. Take us there, Cole said. Walter closed the notebook and moved toward the passageway. Do not bring the laptops, he replied. Where we are going, they will only repeat the same lie. Walter Mercer led them down 2 narrow ladders and through a passageway where the emergency lights had faded to the color of dying embers. The air grew warmer with every step. Pipes clicked behind the bulkheads as the powerless ship cooled unevenly around them. At the end of the passage stood an old steel cabinet hidden behind a newer control enclosure. Its paint did not match the surrounding equipment. Walter brushed his thumb across a salt-white streak near the lower hinge, then opened the notebook to the page marked by the same pale stain. For a moment, the dark passageway disappeared. He was 22 again, standing inside another destroyer in the winter of 1986. The North Atlantic had risen around the ship like a moving wall. Wind screamed across the upper decks at more than 70 miles per hour, and 30-foot waves struck the hull with enough force to make every light tremble. Walter was a second-class petty officer then, young enough to trust every printed diagram and experienced enough to know when the paper was lying. The ship had just completed a major electrical upgrade. New controls had been installed over old machinery, and the engineers who approved the work believed the two generations would function as one. Then the main generators dropped offline during the storm. Emergency power came up, failed, and came up again. On the third attempt, the entire aft section went dark. Chief Raymond Hale found Walter beside the transfer cabinet, holding a flashlight between his teeth and comparing the new manual to a wiring plate stamped before either of them had joined the Navy. Hale was nearly 60, with silver hair cut close and hands that seemed to understand steel before he touched it. He listened to the cabinet for 3 seconds and shook his head. "The new system thinks the old interlock is gone," he said. "The old interlock thinks the new system is a fault." Water had forced its way through a damaged weather seal farther above, sending a thin stream across the deck. Hale pulled a black notebook from his coveralls and pressed it into Walter's hands. "Write this down. The official manual will be corrected later." Walter opened to a clean page while Hale described the hidden sequence. The first transfer woke the interlock. The second armed it. The third made it isolate the entire aft bus to protect equipment that no longer existed. The correction required patience, not force. Loads had to be restored in a precise order, with a 12-second pause between stages. A heavy roll of the ship threw loose tools across the deck and drove Hale against the cabinet. He remained conscious, but one leg would not support him. Walter called for help, yet Hale caught his sleeve before the sailors carried him away. "Finish the sequence," the chief said. "There are more than 200 people aboard, and none of them can steer through this weather without power." Walter knelt beneath the red emergency lamp and followed the handwritten steps. One circuit returned, then another. Ventilation began to turn. Steering answered from below. On the bridge, a young ensign Thomas Whitaker regained the instruments he needed to help guide the destroyer through the storm. By sunrise, the ship was still moving under her own power. Hale never returned to sea. The promised manual correction was buried beneath later upgrades, but Walter kept the notebook. Before leaving the ship, Hale added one sentence beneath the diagram. "Computers remember what they are told. A sailor remembers what nearly cost the ship." The memory released Walter as Noah's flashlight crossed the salt stain on the present cabinet. 40 years had passed, but the hinge, the hidden interlock, and the silence behind the steel were the same. Walter placed his palm against the door. "Chief Hale," he whispered, too softly for Cole to hear. Then he looked at Noah. "Open it carefully. The past is still wired into this ship." Noah Bennett set his flashlight between his teeth and loosened the cabinet fasteners one at a time. The steel door resisted at first, then opened with a slow scrape that sounded far too loud in the narrow passage. Inside, newer wiring ran beside older conductors wrapped in faded insulation. Labels had been replaced. Colors had changed. The logic behind them had not. Walter Mercer leaned closer without touching anything. His eyes moved from the upper contactor to a small mechanical linkage buried behind the modern control assembly. "There," he said. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole followed his gaze. "That device is not shown on the current diagram, because the diagram was redrawn after the panel was replaced." Walter pointed to a narrow brass arm almost hidden by bundled cable. But the arm was never removed. Noah studied it. "It is still connected to the aft transfer path." Cole raised his radio. "Engineering control, confirm whether the legacy interlock appears in the configuration database." Static cracked before the reply came. "Negative, sir. No legacy interlock is listed." Cole looked at Walter. "Then the computer cannot monitor it." "The computer is monitoring the command," Walter said, "not the movement." He asked Noah to shine the light toward the lower relay. A thin line of polished metal showed where the linkage had been moving, but not far enough. Each restart energized the modern system. The hidden mechanism interpreted that signal through its older logic and prepared to isolate the aft bus. On the next load increase, it completed the action. The computer reported a successful transfer because every digital component had responded correctly. The mechanical interlock had rejected that success in silence. Cole studied the cabinet, his confidence giving way to concentration. The system was not lying. "No," Walter said. "It was answering the wrong question." Another warning sounded over the radio. Battery reserve had fallen below 50%. The auxiliary compartment was approaching its temperature limit, and the sailors in the stalled elevator had been instructed to remain calm while a rescue team prepared manual access. Cole checked the clock. 19 minutes remained. How do we reset it? Walter opened the notebook and traced the old sequence with one finger. We do not force it. We let both systems believe they are in control long enough to bring them into agreement. Cole read the handwritten steps. Forward lighting first. 12-second delay. Ventilation next. Another delay. Then steering support and internal communications. Nothing else until the linkage settles. Cole frowned. Why 12 seconds? Walter listened to the cabinet. Because the spring behind that arm needs 11. Noah almost smiled, but Walter's expression stopped him. The extra second is for the sailor who might count too fast. Cole looked back toward the passageway. The young technicians were waiting beyond the open hatch, silent now, their earlier amusement gone. This procedure is not in any approved manual. Walter closed the notebook halfway. Neither is the fault. Cole took a slow breath. Authority and responsibility pressed against each other in his face. He could follow the official process and watch reserve power disappear, or trust a man whose prediction had already come true twice. What do you need? He asked. Walter handed the notebook to Noah. A stopwatch, direct communication with every load station, and people who will follow the order exactly. Cole lifted his radio. His voice changed when he spoke, losing the edge of wounded pride and gaining the steadiness of command. All stations, prepare for controlled restoration under local direction. No one closes a circuit without verbal authorization. Then he looked at Walter. You have the ship. Walter shook his head. Not yet. He placed 2 fingers lightly against the cabinet and waited for the faint vibration to fade. First, we have to teach her that the danger is over. Walter kept his fingers against the cabinet until the final tremor disappeared. Then he looked at Noah Bennett. Before we begin, find the original modification record, not the modern summary. The first one. Noah glanced at Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole. Cole gave a single nod. Use the engineering archive terminal and damage control central. Search every retired configuration file tied to the aft transfer system. Noah moved quickly through the dim passageways, carrying the black notebook beneath one arm. The ship felt different now. Without ventilation, heat clung to the steel walls, and every emergency lamp seemed weaker than the last. Sailors passed him with flashlights and portable radios, their faces tense but controlled. When Noah reached Damage Control Central, he found 2 petty officers monitoring battery reserve and compartment temperatures. He sat at an isolated terminal powered by an emergency unit and entered the oldest system designation from Walter's notebook. Nothing appeared. He tried the modern equipment number. Hundreds of records filled the screen, but every file began after the most recent modernization. Noah opened the notebook and studied the scorched page. Beneath the word sleeping breaker, Walter had written a smaller code in faded pencil. Noah entered it exactly. The terminal paused. Then a restricted archive notice appeared. He entered his credentials and requested historical access. One document opened, scanned from a paper record dated February of 1986. The diagram matched the cabinet below. The hidden mechanical linkage was clearly marked, along with a handwritten warning about repeated transfer attempts. At the bottom of the page was a signature. Walter Mercer, Electrical Systems Petty Officer. Noah searched the name. A second record appeared, followed by a third. Emergency Power Restoration Procedures. Fleet-wide Recommendations. Cold Weather Transfer Modifications. Each document carried the same signature, sometimes beside that of Chief Raymond Hale. Then Noah found a personnel summary with most of its details sealed. The visible lines were enough. Walter had not merely repaired one destroyer. His procedure had been adapted for multiple ships during the final years of the Cold War. The report credited his actions with preserving steering, communications, and safe operating power during a severe North Atlantic emergency. A list of officers aboard that night appeared on the final page. Noah stopped when he saw one name. Ensign Thomas Whitaker. He reached for the secure telephone and called the Admiral's staff office aboard the ship. An aide answered. Rear Admiral Whitaker's inspection team. This is Ensign Noah Bennett from the Resolute's engineering department. I need to speak with the Admiral regarding Walter Mercer. The aide's voice remained formal. The Admiral is currently on the bridge. What is the nature of the request? Tell him the aft bus failure matches the North Atlantic incident from 1986. Tell him Mr. Mercer has Chief Hale's notebook. Silence followed. Then the line clicked. Rear Admiral Thomas Whitaker came on himself. Repeat the name. Walter Mercer, sir. Whitaker did not answer for several seconds. When he finally spoke, the authority in his voice had been replaced by something deeper. Where is he? At the original transfer cabinet, sir. Noah heard movement on the other end, followed by the sharp closing of a door. Ensign, no one energizes that system until I arrive. Do you understand? Yes, sir. And Bennett, Whitaker added, do not call him Mr. Mercer again. Noah looked at the old signature on the screen. What should I call him, sir? The Admiral's answer came quietly. Chief Mercer. That is the name he earned. Rear Admiral Thomas Whitaker reached the lower passageway without ceremony. No aides announced him. No photographer followed. Only the measured strike of his shoes against the steel deck warned the waiting sailors that someone senior was approaching. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole turned first and straightened. The technicians followed. Walter Mercer remained beside the open cabinet, 2 fingers resting against its frame as he listened to the hidden linkage settle. Whitaker stopped several feet away. For a moment, the Admiral did not see an 82-year-old man in a faded blue jacket. He saw a young petty officer beneath a red emergency lamp, steadying a ship in a North Atlantic storm while everyone else waited for the darkness to lift. Whitaker drew himself to attention. Chief Mercer, he said. Every sailor in the passageway went still. Walter looked up slowly. Admiral. Whitaker's gaze moved to the black notebook in Noah Bennett's hands. Chief Hale's book. What remains of it? Walter replied. Cole stepped forward. Sir, the reserve battery is below 45%. Chief Mercer has identified an undocumented mechanical interlock behind the modern transfer assembly. We are prepared to attempt a controlled restoration. Whitaker looked at Walter. Can you bring her back? Walter glanced toward Cole and the technicians gathered behind him. They can. Whitaker understood the distinction. He faced the engineering team and spoke with quiet authority. This inspection is suspended. From this moment forward, every station follows Chief Mercer's sequence without alteration. Then he looked directly at Walter. Chief Mercer, she is yours. Walter shook his head once. She belongs to the crew, Admiral. I only remember what she needs. He positioned Cole at the radio, Noah beside the cabinet, and Petty Officer Mason at the local control. Forward lighting only, Walter said. No ventilation. No communications. Nothing else. Cole repeated the order to every station. Mason closed the first circuit. A muted hum moved beneath the deck. White lights appeared along the forward passageway, 1 row at a time. Noah started the stopwatch. Walter watched the brass arm inside the cabinet. Hold. 11 seconds passed. The mechanism shifted with a faint metallic click. Ventilation. Cole issued the command. Fans began turning throughout the ship, slowly at first, then with a steady rising breath. Cooler air entered the passageway. No alarm followed. Hold again, Walter said. Sweat gathered along Cole's temple, but his voice remained level as he counted the seconds. Walter gave the next order. Internal communications. Radios cleared. Reports arrived from the stalled elevator, the auxiliary compartment, and the bridge. Every station remained stable. The reserve stopped falling. Walter studied the notebook, then the cabinet. Steering support. The circuit closed. A deeper vibration spread through the hull, smooth and even. On the bridge, dormant consoles awakened in waves of green and amber. Radar began its slow rotation above the superstructure. Navigation screens returned. The Resolute seemed to draw a full breath. Cole looked at Walter, waiting for the final step. Walter listened to the ship for 3 long seconds. This time, the missing relay answered. Now bring up the remaining load, he said. Power flowed through the destroyer in controlled stages. Lights stretched down every passageway. Cooling returned to the auxiliary compartment. The service elevator reached the next deck, and the sailors inside stepped out safely. No warning tone sounded. No breaker rejected the load. Around the open cabinet, the young technicians stood in reverent silence as the old destroyer came fully alive. Whitaker looked at Walter. 40 years, he said softly. Walter closed the notebook. Steel forgets slowly, Admiral. Men forget faster. The destroyer held steady under full electrical load as reports arrived from every compartment. Cooling temperatures fell. Internal communications remained clear. Steering, navigation, and radar operated without interruption. The inspection team gathered in engineering control, but the room no longer felt like a place of judgment. It felt like a classroom after a lesson no one expected to receive. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole stood beside the main console, watching the system display confirm what Walter Mercer had already known by sound. For several seconds, Cole said nothing. Then he removed his cover and faced the old chief. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I knew every current diagram aboard this ship. I believe that meant I knew the ship." Walter looked toward the humming panels. "You knew what was written down." Cole nodded. "And I dismissed what was not." The technicians remained silent. No one smiled now. Petty Officer Mason stepped forward and returned a small pencil that had fallen from Walter's notebook during the restoration. "Chief Mercer," he said, "I am sorry for what I said about the book." Walter accepted the pencil. "Do not apologize to the book. Learn why it had to exist." Rear Admiral Thomas Whitaker entered engineering control with Captain Daniel Hargrove, the commanding officer of the Resolute. Hargrove had spent the blackout coordinating the ship's response from the bridge. Now he looked at Walter with the solemn respect of a captain meeting part of his vessel's hidden history. "The inspection record will show that the crew recovered from an undocumented configuration hazard," Hargrove said. "It will also show who identified it." Walter shook his head. "Put the crew's names in the report. They restored the power." Whitaker folded his arms. "And what about yours?" "Mine has been on enough paper." Noah Bennett stood nearby holding the black notebook. Whitaker suggested that it should be preserved at the National Museum of the United States Navy. "The worn pages," he said, "belonged where future sailors could understand what earlier generations had carried." Walter considered the offer, then looked at Noah. "A museum can preserve what happened," he said. "This ship needs to preserve what was learned." He handed the notebook to the young ensign. Noah received it carefully, as though the faded cover carried more weight than steel. "Digitize every diagram," Walter told him. "Verify every circuit against the hardware. Replace the names we used with proper system terms, but keep the warnings. And make sure the next crew does not need an 82-year-old man to explain why their lights went out." Noah opened to the final page. Beneath Chief Raymond Hale's old sentence was another line Walter had added years later. "A ship survives when one generation leaves the next more than steel." Cole read it over Noah's shoulder. "We will update the manual," he said. "All of it." Walter gave a small nod. By late afternoon, the inspection had resumed, but its purpose had changed. Admiral Whitaker no longer asked whether the Resolute could follow procedure. He asked whether her crew understood the history beneath it. Cole answered differently than he would have that morning. Before Walter stepped onto the pier, the sailors who had worked in the dark formed a quiet line along the passageway. No order had been given. No ceremony had been planned. Cole stood at the front and raised his hand in salute. One by one, the others followed. Walter paused, then returned it. The wind carried the harbor's salt across the deck as he walked ashore. Behind him, the destroyer remained bright against the gathering evening. Every system alive, every lesson finally remembered. Machines grow newer. Wisdom survives only when someone chooses to pass it on.